tonight on the Twilight Zone podcast, we're going to take a different signpost up ahead, and we're going to take a look at one of those other avenues of the Twilight Zone. And one of the forms of the Twilight Zone that has been around almost as long as the television show itself is the Twilight Zone in comic book form. But I'm not going to take this road alone. Tonight I have a guest with me. I announced him last time, and it is my good friend, Zach Moore. How's it going, Zach?
Hey, Tom. Happy to be on this supernatural highway with you as we take the signpost up ahead to Comicville.
Yeah. Well, this was your idea, so, we'll see how this turns out and whether I will thank you for that in the end.
Don't hold it against me if we...
Normally, when I do things like this, I would wait till the end of the show to say to people, what do you do? What kind of podcasting do you do? That kind of thing. But, now I think it's nice to do that up front because it gives the audience a chance to get to know you, because I've been on your show, was it last year now?
Yeah, I think it was about a year ago. Yes, sir.
But you've not been on this show, so let's introduce you to the audience. Tell us a bit about your podcasting.
Well, Portrait of a... I don't know. I was going to go into some Rod Serling intro about myself, but no, I'm not 36. I'm 31, actually, for those who are interested. So I'm not a salesman with a midlife crisis. So I do have a podcast, Standard Orbit, on the Trek FM Star Trek podcasting network, and we talk about the original series, old, new, animated, anything to have to do with Captain Kirk and the Enterprise. That's our wheelhouse over there. That's my... Star Trek is like my first nerd love, if you will. I grew up watching Star Trek, the movies, The Next Generation. Those are Deep Space Nine as well. I love all those. And there's a lot of crossover between the Twilight Zone and Star Trek, so that's why we got to talk on our show last year. I believe the episode was called... I'm terrible with episode numbers, but we try to think of catchy names for them, right? So this one was called Defined by a Sword in His Hand, and we were talking about George Takei in the Encounter episode of the Twilight Zone, and then it's all about a sword, a samurai sword. And on Star Trek, probably Sulu's most famous moment in episode is in the naked time where he's running out with the sword. So we kind of made that connection. That's where that title comes from. So for those of you who want to hear Tom over on Standard Orbit, go look it up, and you can find us over there. So love Star Trek, talk about Star Trek all the time. I also love Smallville. I'm a big Superman fan, and I grew up at the same time as Smallville was on the air, and that's a show... For those not familiar, it's a show about young Superman, Clark Kent, growing up in Smallville before he's Superman. And I'd always been a DC Comics fan, I love superheroes and things like that. And the main thing with me, though, I was the same age as Clark on the show. So, like, freshman year of high school, Clark was, I was freshman year in high school. So that, to me, that, like, sealed the deal. Like, oh, man, this is my life. This is great. I'm going to grow up with this show. So, anyway, those are my two podcasts. Those are my loves. You can find us on Trek FM on Twitter, and you can find us at Always Smallville with one S on Twitter as well. That's the best, quickest way to find us out there. And I just, I love podcasting. A lot of people, they connect with other fans and express their fandom in different ways, and I just love like the conversational aspect of it. And I must say, now that I'm on the Twilight Zone podcast, your podcast is one of the big inspirations for me to go into podcasting, because that was back in 2009. Was it you started?
Maybe 2010.
Okay, something like that. Yeah. So I had recently graduated college, and I got an iPhone, and I'm like, oh, podcasts. Let me get into this. And what are some shows that I like? I like the Twilight Zone. Is there a Twilight Zone podcast? There is. It's the Twilight Zone podcast. You can't get more official than that. And there have been many have come after you, but you stand head and shoulders above the rest still. So I'm really, really happy to be here on the Twilight Zone podcast talking to you, Tom.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate that, and, let's not compliment each other too much, but, I'm a kind of lapsed Trekkie, but I haven't watched the original series in years, but I still listen to Standard Orbit just because I love the kind of camaraderie of it, and it does remind me of things that I watched years ago and kind of thing, and I always think, I'm going to watch some Star Trek again, and I never get round to it, but I still enjoy the podcast purely because you guys put on a great show over there. So thank you, man.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, so what we're going to do tonight, we've talked about this a little bit. It's going to be maybe a little looser than your general Twilight Zone podcast because, like I said, it's about the Twilight Zone in comics, but we're not going to talk about the old Gold Key comics. Have you ever read any of those?
I have not. I've seen the covers. I believe you posted some of them on the some of the social media. So those looked interesting. That Star Trek actually has some similar interesting looking Gold Key comics. So they had a really wild and vivid imagination back then in the 60s when they were doing tie-in comics, didn't they?
Yeah. I don't mean to be rude about them. I don't personally like them that much. I think the covers are beautiful, but I have read a bunch of them, and they're just kind of really simplistic, which is fine. That's what it was at the time. But I think comics have moved on so much now that it is difficult to kind of read them. And then there was, I think Now Comics did a run, which was a little bit crazy. I've read some of those, but again, there'd be things like giant bugs in them, things that aren't particularly Twilight Zone-esque. But then, a few years ago now, maybe 2013, 2014, it was Dynamite Comics who seemed to get the license to do Twilight Zone. They started out with the J. Michael Straczynski, I always struggle with his name, run of Twilight Zone comic books. So we won't go too deep into them because we're going to focus more on the Shadow and Substance run, and I'll explain what that is in a minute. But what did you think of the Straczynski run?
I love J. Michael Straczynski. I'm very familiar with his work from Babylon 5, which is one of the best sci-fi shows of all time. If people haven't watched it, it's on Amazon Prime now, so it's really a lot more accessible if people want to check out his work. And he had a singular vision on that show, and he had a singular vision in his, trilogy of comic books. They ended up being collected into 3 parts: the way out, the way in, and the way back. And and it was unique for the Twilight Zone because even in something like Twilight Zone the movie, for example, there was no overarching story, but in this trilogy there was. And I thought, hearing that, you think, can you pull that off in the Twilight Zone? Usually they're episodic or self-contained. But I felt like they actually did intersect quite nicely and very cleverly, and it was ultimately an extremely satisfying experience. Everything kind of pays off at the end. I don't want to spoil anything here. I recommend everyone go check it out. But there's certain things he plants seeds that you forget about, and then you come back around him at the end, like, oh, it's all connected. It makes sense. And I know a question you ask a lot is it good? Yes, it's good. Is it Twilight Zone? I'd say so. So, for anyone who wants more Twilight Zone, I definitely recommend checking out the J. Michael Straczynski initial run on Dynamite Comics.
Yeah. I actually think, obviously they're doing the Jordan Peele Twilight Zone now, but if they were going down the movie route, I think that would be a pretty decent template for how to do a Twilight Zone movie, rather than having separate segments, because it is segmented, but they overlap so beautifully into this really satisfying whole that I think that would be a really great way to do it, And I think as a start off to this run of comic books, it really did start out on a high, didn't it?
Well, and there was, at the time, I don't know if they had planned to do an ongoing run. This was a limited run, and I think that helped because they could tell a story with a beginning, middle, and an end. And again, if you have to just come out with comic books indefinitely, you have to do episodic. You have to do, you start to run out of ideas as we might find as we get into Shadow and Substance. But for this one, that helped that they had a certain goal in mind, or at least he did. And again, it's self-contained. It's not a part of an ongoing story, and I think that really helps that as well. And I 100% agree. If they were going to do a movie, just adapt that, like straight up, adapt that into a movie. He's done movie scripts before. He's written The Changeling, the movie that Clint Eastwood directed. He also did the script of Thor, the first Thor movie from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and he's no stranger to live action. And he worked on the original not the original. I was going to say the original reboot of the Twilight Zone from the 80s. So I would love. I don't know what his schedule's like, but man, if they can get him in on the Jordan Peele show, he'd be a great resource to contribute. Even adapt some of these stories, right? It'd be great. But even if they don't, they stand great as comics alone. They don't have to be adapted to have worth. I think they're great as they are.
People's thoughts on that show are very mixed, but he actually did a book as well of the stories that he wrote in that reboot series, and he wrote them in prose and in book form. And taken away from that very 80s look that the show had, the stories stand on their own really well as great Twilight Zone stories. I think he was able to tap into that Twilight Zone vibe really well. Whether it's successful in the 80s show because of a number of things, everyone has their own opinions on that. But I do think he's really got Twilight Zone credentials as a writer, So after Straczynski's run, we then had a book called Twilight Zone: The Shadow. It was a 4-issue miniseries, and I must admit, when I first heard about it, I was like, really? You're doing this? Okay. But I ended up reading it, and I did become convinced. So what were your thoughts on Twilight Zone: The Shadow?
So I was familiar with the Shadow only through the Alec Baldwin movie from the 90s. I had no other like comic books or any kind of pre-established thoughts about what the Shadow should be. But I love it. He's from that pulpy 30s era, of the original Batman and that kind of thing. So that they kind of, those characters actually correlate. And if you actually look at, he has a butler in a car in a costume, and he's a socialite. He is kind of like a Bruce Wayne light. Well, actually, I don't know who came first, the Shadow or Batman. Actually, so I don't know. I don't want to say who's copying who, but I love that time period. It is much like the 50s of the Twilight Zone is timeless. The 30s, the Art Deco is timeless in its own way, and so it is. As you said. I'm very skeptical when they cross over intellectual properties. Right? I think one of the most egregious ones I ever saw was Star Trek X-Men. I was like, what is this nonsense? I've never read it. It might be good and entertaining. I don't know. But I just saw a cover, and it's like Worf and Wolverine on together. I'm like, okay. I know you have the Patrick Stewart connection there, Professor X, but anyway, that's its own wrinkle. But anyway, it's when they try to when companies try to force together two intellectual properties to try to get both audiences. It's usually a shrewd corporate move, and it's birthed out of that, not out of creativity. Like somebody, I have a great idea for the Shadow in the Twilight Zone, but that is the case here. The author did have a great idea, and I think it pulled together pretty well because the Shadow, he is from based off what I'm familiar with. I'm by no means an expert on him, but he does delve into that mystical world. So there is that. The fringes of the natural and the supernatural that he exists on, that can cross over the Twilight Zone very well, and it kind of taught him a lesson he went through his own, as if he were the main character in a Twilight Zone episode, having to be the Shadow. That is what this run was, and it's not like the Shadow teaming up with the Twilight Zone or something. I don't even know what that would look like, but he went on this journey, and he went on it with him, and it paired a lot of respect to the history of the character, as I understand it as well. And I even as a fan of the Shadow, I really liked it, and that has kind of made me reconsider perhaps more crossovers with the Twilight Zone. Maybe that's an avenue they could take in the future, but I don't know. You got to be really careful with this because, like I said, if the wrong things they just don't matter. I don't want to see the Twilight Zone Green Lantern or something. I don't think that would work. But anyway, I really enjoyed this run, and I think it respected both intellectual properties.
I would be open to it, but like you say, you'd need to be quite careful with it about what you did, because I collect the Planet of the Apes Boom comic books, the ones that they're doing over there, and they're great, and a lot of them I haven't read. They're sitting on my shelf, but I'm too Twilight Zone orientated at the moment. That's for another day. But they did their main kind of book, and I think maybe it wasn't selling enough or something because they stopped doing that. And then I've got sitting on my shelf over there, you mentioned them, Green Lantern. We've got Planet of the Apes Green Lantern. We've got Planet of the Apes King Kong.
Okay, I love King Kong. The original 1933 King Kong is my favorite film of all time. And I love King Kong. And so I haven't, much like you, I have them sitting in a pile. I haven't read them yet, but I have them buying it. I'm like, this is fascinating. I'm like, they're both apes, so I can see why you made the connection, but I'm curious to see where they go with that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. They might be great, and I'm sure they are, because a lot of the Apes books have been great, but would we like to see that with the Twilight Zone? I don't know. Maybe not Twilight Zone King Kong, but I'm sure, Twilight Zone, some things might be fine. I mean, Batman would probably work quite well if the Shadow did, because, again, they're both characters who judge other people in certain ways, so that could work.
I think there's a writer-artist, Matt Wagner, who did some Batman comics, and I forget the name of the duology, but one was like Batman and the Mad Monk and Batman and the Monster Men, and they were reinterpretations of early 30s comic books, like by Bob Kane and Bill Finger, and that's why they worked so well in that context. Yeah. And they dealt with supernatural kind of things, like the one with the Mad Monk he's a vampire, but you never really know if he was a vampire or not, and I think that kind of ambiguity could totally work. So if they did take the pre-Robin, purple gloves Batman, with a gun, let's get him in the Twilight Zone. That I would be interested in that. Yes.
Cool. Okay, so that's kind of where Dynamite got up to a certain point, and then they started releasing a book called Shadow and Substance. Now, at the time, I thought this was going to be a regular book, like an ongoing series, but maybe it was and it got cancelled, or maybe it was and they just kind of thought it's a limited run. I really don't know the history of it, but is it right that they haven't released a book since 2014?
I looked at it. I was looking for the sequel, Things and Ideas, which I think would be the logical sequel title to Shadow and Substance. Couldn't find it though, but no, I wasn't able to find any new Twilight Zones since. So I have a suspicion that perhaps sales were not what they had hoped, and they just kind of quietly, put it on the shelf for now, so to speak. And I would assume, when the Jordan Peele show starts, maybe it'll start up again because they're all about tie-ins and stuff like that. But no, as far as I could tell as well, Tom, this is all we got so far from Dynamite.
So they collected these issues. I think it was that book, Shadow and Substance, and maybe a couple of annuals or something. Mm-hmm. And they collected them all into quite a hefty little book here. And it's got 11 Twilight Zone stories in it. Now, most of them were written by a gentleman named Mark Rayner, I believe. We're going to kind of just flick through these, and like I said, we'll keep it quite loose because there's 11 stories. We don't want to get too deep because we'll be here all night, but also some of them, I'm not sure you could get too deep into them. Right. So this episode will be maybe a little scrappier than usual, and you'll probably hear those pages turn and as we're going through them. But the first story is a story called Stumbling Distance. Now, it concerns a writer who is going to his hometown for a book signing. And he likes a drink. He spends the whole plane journey there just chugging back the booze. And when he gets back there through some kind of mechanism, he ends up meeting himself as a kid, kind of thing. Obviously, it's a kind of play on walking distance, stumbling distance, because he's a drunkard. His mum's a drunkard, but he meets himself as a kid, doesn't he? And kind of, we see the problematic life he had as a child, don't we? Yeah,
it's first of all, I'm glad they at least acknowledged that, yes, we're calling it stumbling distance. We know it's walking distance. Okay, we know you're going to say that it is, so they got that out of the way with the title. It did feel like a very Twilight Zone setup. Writer. They say that writers are like the best main characters or reporters, right, to have in stories because they have no 8 to 5 schedule, so you can have them go anywhere and do anything at any time. So that kind of opens up the storytelling possibilities. I say it is a very Twilight Zone story, but it is a little cliche, right? It's like, oh, you meet yourself as a kid, and he's a troubled past, and maybe maybe your mom wasn't as bad as you thought, or that kind of thing. And it's interesting because he's not. It is like he's on the fringes of the past, like he encounters the kid and his mom, but he's not in the past 100%. He kind of slowly slips into it, which kind of parallels his downward spiral out of touch with reality. He misses his book signing. He doesn't call people back. He really kind of falls into this rabbit hole, which I did like that aspect. Someone like who's slowly losing control or the perception of the world around them as well, instead of just like, oh wait, I'm back in 1983 or something. So that was a new wrinkle to like the walking distance template, I think.
We might as well put out a spoiler warning because we will spoil these stories. But what I'll do, I'll put in the show notes a timestamp. And if you just want to say, is this book worth getting, you can go and see where that timestamp is and know where you need to jump forward to. But it actually reminds me, yes, of walking distance, but also an 80s Twilight Zone episode that I just covered recently on Twilight Zone Aftermath called A Life Furnished in Early Poverty by Harlan Ellison. And it's kind of a progression of that story because, Martin Sloan in Walking Distance doesn't really hang out with himself as a kid as such, but A Life Furnished in Early Poverty, he's hanging out with himself as a kid. They're doing this, they're wrestling and all kinds of stuff. And in this one, he meets his younger self, and he's kind of trying to say to him, listen, things are going to be okay. Your life is a bit crappy at the moment, but things are going to get better. And it's kind of leading up to a pivotal event that he knows is going to happen. We kind of get there, and he makes a decision that he's going to try and stop this event happening. Now, I guess maybe this is where it diverges from your typical walking distance or A Life Furnished in Early Poverty, doesn't it? Mm-hmm.
Because he chooses to stay in the past and rewrite his own history, which is, new. Like you said, it's a new twist on it. I don't know. I mean, here's the thing, right? This isn't like this isn't like Back to the Future or Terminator or Star Trek where there's some kind of time travel rules. This is the Twilight Zone here, so we don't know what the rules are. So you think, oh, well, if he stays in the past, how could he blah blah blah? You know, grandfather paradox and all that. But he's gonna rewrite history with himself, and they're just gonna take over the world together or whatever. You know, they kind of have a devil may care attitude as they drive off with that car. And there was, I guess, was the car salesman, and now we're just talking about it, right? Was he like the conduit of the Twilight Zone there? Because he's like, make sure you bring this car back by this time, and if you don't, you won't get home. I mean, that's the way I interpreted it. That was the one kind of pivot point or pivot character between the reality of the real world and the Twilight Zone experience that he went through.
It's a good call. I didn't really see it at the time, but I thought the car was, but I thought that might just be one of those Twilight Zone devices, that thing that needs to be where it needs to be at a particular time. But yeah, so it's kind of like Martin Sloan going back and speaking to his dad, and his dad saying, you only get one summer, you can't go back. And he's like, you know what, Dad? No, I am going to come back. I'm going to move back in. So, screw you, Dad.
But, oh, man, when the mom ripped up the comic books, so I obviously am a comic fan. We're talking about these comics here. I was like, oh, no, what a terrible mom. So,
But the thing that was going to happen is he was going to slash his wrists as a child. And we see when he drives off with the kid that those slash marks on his wrist begin to fade. So, obviously, they're going to a new future that they're going to kind of rewrite himself, where he becomes his own guardian in a way. So, I thought this was a decent enough start. Like you say, it's a little cliche now because we've seen it a lot, but maybe that ending was a different enough twist to make it a bit different.
It reminded me, and maybe this is in the Twilight Zone mindset that I meant as I read these. It reminded me of the end of It's a Good Life from the movie, where they kind of drive off and we have a troubled kid who now has a guardian who's going to look after him and like set him straight, and they're off to better things and a better tomorrow. So it was a kind of redemptive story. Because I mean, obviously, the literal scars of his youth have disappeared, and now they have a fresh start. So yeah. As a start, I think this was solid. So I would recommend this as a just down the middle, above average Twilight Zone story.
Okay, so then, still within the Shadow and Substance book, the second story is called Jailbreak. Now, there's echoes of a few things here. We kind of meet this guy. He's an astronaut. Don't ask me names because, I went through this book yesterday and again today, but there's 11 stories here, so I'm not going to remember everyone's name. But he kind of finds himself in this place, and it's almost like some sort of complex, very plain, very bare. You've got your bedroom, but there's no roof on your bedroom because all of these people there are being overseen by some sort of beings who we don't see. They're being fed by these beings. Most people seem quite docile and, accepting of what this is, but we have this character who comes in and, he's our major in 5 characters in search of an exit. He's not going to settle for being in this place, kind of thing. So what do you think of this one, Zach?
Well, there is a gradual reveal to, like, it starts out, you're just tight, and you don't know, like, you're tight on tight shots of dialogue and the walls, and you don't see, like, what's really going on here for the first, couple pages, and I think, okay, that's cool. They kind of ease you into this status quo. I thought it was, it reminded me of the end of, spoilers, of, what's the one, Stopover in a Quiet Town, where they get, basically taken by aliens and played with, and they're in this fake environment, so that's immediately what I thought about. It also reminded me a bit of The Cage from Star Trek, the original pilot, where they take Captain Pike and they put him in a cage. And in Star Trek, same thing. We're not, we're getting out of this. It doesn't. All these other aliens, you guys are docile. Well, not me. I'm Captain Pike. I'm getting back to my ship. That kind of. So that's what this guy's attitude. And that's a great call for 5 characters in search for an exit. Is that one guy who will not accept the new status quo. And I think how was this a 2-part story? I think, and I think maybe the first part.
I believe so.
The first part, I was like kind of engaged and all that, and going along with it. But then they eventually kind of get down to like this montage of all this time passing, like the second part, and then it's over, and you're like, oh, well, I don't know. Like, I don't know what the point was, to be honest, with this story at the end of the day, right? What were your thoughts on it?
I mean, there's a few confusing aspects to me. In Straczynski's run, I always knew what was happening all the time. I find myself in this book, there's a few times where I'm scratching my head.
Thank you. Good. I felt the same way, because I'm like, I feel like I'm a smart guy. I'm pretty, good reader. I can kind of follow, but I'm like, did I miss something here? Or are there some weird leaps of plot and logic that I'm just completely missing? I'm right there with you, Tom.
Yeah, and this is one of them, like they get in a fight and one of them breaks his arm and he comes in with this sort of bubble over his arm, and I guess the overlords, these beings or whatever, are kind of looking at him, but then there's this other part where the shiny thing comes down and he grabs it and he disappears, and it's like... Yeah,
where do they go? It's like a mystery. Like they build up this mystery of, like, people are being taken away, and, like, I don't know, sometimes they come back, sometimes they don't, and you think, so there's gonna be a reveal at some point of, like, where this is, but there's not. There's no payoff to that mystery. The only payoff is, like, you see... What I can interpret is, like, there's some kind of energy beings, and they, like, and they treat us like we would treat a cat, because there is some... They show, like, they do some juxtaposition of, like, a cat and a human, and they're like, see, we are the pets. I'm like, okay, wow, mind-blowing. I don't know. I guess that's what they were going for, I guess. But I expected more of a bite to the payoff of something. I don't know, because there's not really a twist, other than, okay, spoilers, but as you said, there's going to be spoilers. He wants to get back to Earth, right? But Earth has been destroyed, and we're in some kind of, like, endangered species habitat here. I guess that would be the twist, but I don't know. It really didn't feel like a twist. It felt like more of a just, an explanation more than a twist to me.
Yeah, like you say, I mean, there's a bit early on where he kind of says, what do you want from us? And this piece of paper falls down and it's a picture of a cat.
Yeah.
So basically, Earth, we're led to believe that Earth has been destroyed and these beings have actually rescued certain people. But I guess it's like us keeping, an ant farm or a hamster or something where we don't truly understand it. We try and understand it to a degree and we try and give it what it needs and stuff like that. So these beings are good, it seems. They're trying to keep them alive, but they are keeping them as pets. And the closing narration is, what's the difference between a prison and a sanctuary? Perhaps it's merely a matter of perspective or the quality of the cage.
Yeah, and then you think of like people are like all over, right? Where he's in the human cage and all that, and like, okay, I guess these are Twilight Zone-esque themes. So I follow what you're trying to say, but I don't know. The narration doesn't really fit what's going on. I was both perplexed. This is the first sign where I was like, okay, I don't think I'm going to like these as much as I liked all the rest. So.
Yeah. I really like the setup, the kind of mystery, and I think there's potential here. That this story of these beings are trying to be helpful. They're trying to be good, and look after them, feed them, and so on. But there's this disconnect of understanding between them that they're never truly going to be able to give them what they need because they don't understand them, they don't understand each other, and they are just kind of keeping them as pets in a way.
Well, what is the journey of this character, though, I guess is the problem. Because in the first one, there's a journey. There's a character arc you can follow, and that's what the Twilight Zone is all about with these characters. This, I mean, he doesn't want to stay there, and he's stuck there, and he dies there, and that's the end. It's like, okay, what a journey we've been on together. So that's what it's missing to me. I think that personal journey of discovery of some kind.
There's pros and cons with this one, I think.
Yes.
There's pros and cons. But then our next story is called Takers. Now, this one is about a senator, and he is about to... I think they're trying to enact some sort of welfare bill or something, and he's a senator and he's going to do that thing that they call filibustering or something, where they will talk something down. They will talk for so long that there isn't time to vote on this thing coming in or whatever, and it essentially kills the bill that they're trying to bring in. He is of the opinion that welfare is not something that should be part of our society. People should, make their own wealth and through hard work and so on. Certain characters argue with him about we need a safety net, and he's like, our forefathers never had a safety net, why do we need one? But he's a rich guy, so he doesn't really understand the struggle of the poorer people. So I guess you could say it's quite timely in that respect. But what happens then, Zach?
Well, he gets transported back in time, as you do in the Twilight Zone, and comes across a community, and they have it's very odd rules in the community, and they it is like, I wish the setup was different, to be honest with you, but anyway, we'll get to that in a second. So he meets a woman, and she has like a kid, and they win a contest, and it's about to go to, like, what do they call it? Like, I forget what the hotel, or there's some word for it, that you've won this prize, and
the banquet.
The bank. There it is, the banquet, right? Oh, that's how appropriate now that I know the twist, right? And so the woman seems to think like it's she can't, like, bring her son or something like that. I'm a little foggy because, like you, I just reread all these, right? But bottom line, it appears to be something that she doesn't want to do because she can't go alone or something like that, and to leave her kid. So he's like, "Oh, well, I'll go for you." And it seems like an altruistic thing for him to do, and it sounds like a good thing too. He's like, "Oh, well, the banquet, this is great. I'm going to go to this thing. You stay in this great place, But the twist is, the banquet. He is the banquet, because it's a town of cannibals and it's people. It's a cookbook. All right. So but then he sees the senator from before, and it's one of these weird, like, time space continuum things, or I'm not sure exactly. Is this guy immortal? Is this a pocket universe he's entered into to teach him a lesson now? I'm not sure exactly where he was, if this was even a real place, or if it was just some, like I said, pocket universe he's fallen into. But then he gets ripped apart and eaten because of welfare. So there you go. He learns his lesson.
Well, the thing is,
I'm sorry that was a convoluted plots and notes. I apologize.
I went along with it to a point. He's this senator. He doesn't agree with welfare, but then he is sent back in time to a kind of like shantytown type deal,
Yes.
And he's staying in this, what they call a flop house or something. So very poor area, very poor people, and they're making do. And, I'm not 100% up on my American history, but it seems that it's the time when America is going to introduce their welfare kind of state. I don't know what the situation over there is with that, but some sort of safety blanket. If you're unemployed, then you can get a certain amount of money to help you back up on the ladder. That's what it seems to me anyway. So he gets in his head that he's been sent there to stop this happening, to stop this welfare state in America being formed. Right. So I guess in normal Twilight Zone kind of situations, I would imagine that he's going back there to learn a lesson, that actually poor people aren't all bad, and sometimes we all do need a helping hand to get back on the ladder and to get our lives in order, and sometimes we do need a little bit of a handout to just help us do that. But instead he gets eaten. So
see, you wanted a twist, there's your twist. So
yeah, it seems very disjointed in that respect for me. I guess by this point, going back in time and seeing the people who you have previously spoken badly of and disagreed with their place in life, and seeing things through their eyes, that's a pretty usual Twilight Zone trope, isn't it? We've seen it a few times. So that's fine. But then when they just eat him at the end, it's like, okay. But the thing is, not only do they eat him, but he meets, when he was in his own time at the beginning of the story, he meets the guy who sort of opposed him at that point.
Right.
And he's one of the people who eats him.
So I feel like had they tried to do maybe 2 or 3 too many things with this one, have they taken maybe 1 or 2 pieces out, made it a little more streamlined? Like I said, like not the senator from before who was his adversary. Don't have him in the past. Maybe don't have him get eaten at the end. I was just thinking about, because we're all Monday morning quarterbacks here, right? We're thinking about it. Like maybe if he had been like, driving home from Washington D.C., pulls over into bad weather, he has to pull over into some small town. that's impoverished, and they have something going on there. I know that would have changed the time travel thing, but I feel like that kind of story maybe could have helped better, because again, it's all these kind of these weird communities that you come across, right, in the Twilight Zone. That might have stuck better. And then I don't know what kind of ending. I definitely would have had him die, because I'd rather, again, the personal journey. His journey was, I'm a jerk, I don't like welfare. Oh good, I can destroy welfare before it even begins. Oh, I'm dead. That's his journey. That's his character arc here. So it's like, oh, okay. I'm like, there are episodes of the Twilight Zone where there are irredeemable characters. You know, there's like Salvador Ross, right? That's a great one right there. I love the ending of that one too. The gut punch to that one. So I mean, I'm not saying that every episode or story in the Twilight Zone needs to have a person learns a lesson, they come back a better man, but I feel it's some sort of progression and evolution. I felt like he was just static the whole time, and then he got eaten. So.
And I guess you could look at it, if there was a safety net there and there's a welfare state, then these people wouldn't have had to eat him. I think it's a bit of a push. Like you say, it's just adding those just a bit too much into that story. And Buck Houghton, that quote, I can't remember the exact word, and where he says there's one trick per story.
Yes.
So you either go back in time and something happens, but you don't go back in time and then meet a ghost, or you don't go back in time and then get eaten. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I wasn't a fan of this one, to be honest. I wasn't too keen on this one at all. Next up, we have a story called Not Fair. And this is about a guy who loves to spend his weekend at Renaissance fairs. He likes to dress up as a knight and, play fight and so on. But I think he's a teacher. And he goes into school, he's got students and so on. And, he bores them a little bit about his weekend and that kind of thing. And the other teachers kind of rip him about it a bit. They call him Filthy instead of Phil. And they kind of make fun of him for his love of Renaissance fairs.
Do you have Renaissance fairs over there in the UK?
Not that I've ever been to. You sometimes have... you'll go to a castle or something and you'll have the staff dressed up as, knights and that kind of thing. I'm not sure there's Renaissance fairs as such, but I could be wrong. No, I could be wrong.
They're pretty prevalent in the United States. I enjoy them. One, just to, it's a great day to be outside, usually in the fall, and the weather's beautiful. It's good people watching, because you have people like this dressing up and all this stuff. And, I just kind of enjoy it. You go for the food. They have, like, turkey legs and that kind of thing. So it is a fun experience. I do like the setup of this story. Somebody who's, like, lives in this, like, fancies himself some amazing knight, right? But again, it's all make-believe, it's play, and he takes it, you can tell, like, he takes it a little too seriously. Even the other guys are like, because he's doing a fake sword fight, and the other guys are like, hey man, they're a little more level-headed than him, and but this is his thing. Like, this is what he obviously dissatisfied with his life, and he gets fulfillment from this, and his coworkers are jerks. It's like, look, the guy likes the Renaissance fair, he might take a little too far, right? But just give the guy, let him have his fun, right? But then we get this I did like. This is remind me of I'm just spurting out the episodes that come to mind as I read these, right? But Rance McGrew, right, where he's like he's a country western star, and he's a tough cowboy, but then like, oh wait, I'm in the past, and I'm not a tough cowboy. Oh, I'm in trouble now, right? This is a great angle to take with this guy, because now he's a knight, and he is a terrible knight. Like, he is, he misunderstands what's going on. Like, he tries to say that he's Sir so and so, and they're like, no, I know so and so, you're not him, and so he gets in some trouble there. So I am 100% with the story. I'm like, this is good stuff. But then it takes another wrinkle at the end, and maybe you could explain to me, Tom, the last the left turn it takes at the very end, where it's like the future now, and they're in like 80s action movie land, and it's so much better than, like, the whole point is, like, another point they're trying to make, I guess, is, you always look back in the world that's not yours and think it's better than the one you're in, and there's something to be said for that. But I felt like they should have just stuck with, the Renaissance Fair thing and followed that through to conclusion. And I felt like we're sitting here second guessing everything, so I feel like a bad Monday morning quarterback here, right? So write your own story. Okay, I get it. But I'm just trying to find ways that I think would streamline it more and make it a more cohesive story, because I was kind of taken aback by the end left turn, where it's like, the futuristic people looking at the 80s. So I don't. What did you think about that?
Well, I'll tell you what I struggled with this one, because, like we say, this guy, he loves a Renaissance fair, you know, and from the sounds of it, they sound great. But you've got to be careful, Zach. You can't like Renaissance fairs because you two might end up actually in the Renaissance. I don't know. But yeah, so he goes back in time and he's in this cruddy village, you know, 30-year-old women look like 70-year-old women. 15-year-old girls are sort of sexual age in bars, that kind of
smell,
thing. So
he's overpowered by the smell. I thought that was a nice touch, something people don't think about the past, right? People can't take a shower every day.
So there's all this stuff, and he goes back there. But yeah, then there's this left turn at the end where you're right. How he ends up there, the device just doesn't seem to be there. He ends up in the future, but it's kind of like you say, an 80s action movie, and he's like, no, it wasn't like this. It wasn't like this. But everyone else seems to think it's great. But the thing is, my struggle with this one is, so the guy likes Renaissance fairs, you know, so let him, like you said, let him have his Renaissance fairs. And when he's in school teaching the kids, he's a bit of a Renaissance fair bore, but he's actually quite good to the kids. You know, he's like, you know, if you've got any problems, then give me a call. It's not like he's such a Renaissance fair fan that he's an arse, you know. He's a nice guy. He just loves his Renaissance fairs. And I just don't feel like he deserves this kind of fate.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Is he trapped in some loop that will ever, like, whenever something like gets reset, he's in another time period and he lives in another, because he's not the teacher anymore. It seems like his real life is playing these video games in the future. So I don't know. Mm-hmm. Again, this is what you mentioned earlier. Like, I'm like, did I miss something here? Is there a page missing from this comic book that would help explain? I don't know. It feels that way.
It looks like it. So, yeah, I mean, you can read it, and it's sort of amusing in its own way. Mm-hmm. You know, if someone's going to get some Twilight Zone intervention, then I kind of feel like there needs to be more of a reason than just liking Renaissance fairs. And I guess it's trying to say, at the end, it's like, be careful what you wish for and how hard you wish for it. Mm. But this would be like, you know, you're a huge Star Trek fan. This would be like you finding... You'd be over the moon though. You finding yourself on the Enterprise.
I'm like, this is great.
So I don't know. You know, it's okay, but like I say, I just don't feel like it fits. The punishment doesn't fit the crime. Mm-hmm. If the crime is like in Renaissance fairs, so there you go. Right, now this next story, I'll be honest with you, it's called The Secret Oversharer, mm-hmm. and it starts out with a lady talking about social media, so you think, great, you know, surely this is something that Twilight Zone needs to get involved in, because it's such a prevalent thing today, and sure, you know, mm-hmm. Black Mirror explores this quite well, so maybe it's time for the Twilight Zone to have its say on social media. So this lady, she's talking about it on television, and she kind of starts to withdraw from social media and that kind of thing within her own life, and she's commenting on other people's use of social media. You know, she goes on and she's commenting on it more and more. She's withdrawing from it more and more herself.
And is it a bad thing or a good thing?
Yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. I mean, right, let's get to the end, right. Okay? And then we'll talk about it, because I feel the middle of it is such a muddle. It doesn't flow very well for me. In the end, basically, she withdraws from social media and so on so much that she ceases to exist. She has pointed out within the story that if you're not posting what you're doing on social media, then it's like pictures or it didn't happen, you know, and that's how people are living their lives now. And I think that's a pretty good thing to explore, you know. But she disappears in the end. What are your thoughts, Zach?
And to you. Yeah, I didn't know. At first, I thought I thought they were going to go one way with it. And then they went another. Like, it's because, yes, I agree that the Twilight Zone, this is some great material. Obviously, mm-hmm. Social media is new, right? Twilight Zone hasn't, even in the 2000 show, we didn't have the social media we have today. So... Mm-hmm. The fact that, yeah, we all spend way too much time on our phones and connected and all that, and I feel like people need to dial it back some, because, you know, people live these lives on social media, they're like enviable. It's like, oh, look at this guy. He's living his wife for doing this or doing that. Oh, he just got, because you're posting all the best things that happen to you. You don't know, just because you know someone's social media profile doesn't mean you know them. And then there's this preoccupation with like, oh, let me take a picture of my meal before I eat it and all that. That is a an issue with just society as it goes these days. So I felt like, oh, this is cool. This author is like kind of like against the grain, saying, hey, get off the grid, But then they try to act like that's a bad thing, I guess, because these little like wacky waving inflatable arm flailing tube men shadows chase her around, and like it's very subtle. You actually don't. It's a very subtle connection of what they're doing and her disappearance from the world. But like the more she retreats, the more like life retreats more than she want. Life retreats for her more than she wanted to retreat for herself. She's missing deadlines at her publisher. She's like, and then like she goes on a date with this guy, and the next day he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never seen you before. So the bleed over to the real life versus the social media, a really cool idea. But they didn't nail it. They did not stick the landing. I don't even know if they stuck the flight, really, because at the end she walks off, and those little waving shadow guys kind of observe and they leave, and I don't know. And it did remind me of Richard Matheson's story, Disappearing Act, short story he wrote, which inspired and then the sky opened. Or the Twilight Zone, where like you disappear, because that's cool. Because if you did the isolation again, that's what's cool about this story in the Twilight Zone aspect, is that this stuff is happening to this woman, and she can't share it with anyone because they're like, nope, I've never seen you before. This, that. She thinks she's going crazy. Maybe she is. But the presence of those other entities kind of throw a wrinkle in there, and I wish they had left them out. So there we are, and I left it saying this was a really cool idea. I wish they had done something else with it. I don't know what that something else would be, but I don't think they got the message across they were trying to get, or any message. So that's my take.
Yeah, part of me thinks it's almost as if the morality is backwards on it, because I was more with her than anyone else in the story.
Yes.
This is a line from her, and it kind of goes with what you said. She says, what percentage of posts do you see that are essentially bragging? Look at me, look at what I'm doing, look at what I'm eating, where I'm going, what I'm watching. And she says, we're not satisfied just doing anything or experiencing anything ourselves anymore. It's like nothing exists for us if we don't post something about it or share it. And I actually think that that's very true, and I myself have withdrawn from social media quite a lot over the past year or two. For that very reason, I felt that it was just becoming too much of a thing in my life, that I was on it all the time. So I actually agree with her point of view here. So the fact that in the end it's her, she disappears, so she was right, but I'm not sure what the kind of lesson she should have kept on social media.
Yeah, what kind of life is she going to go live now? Does she still exist? Does she truly fade away? Like, she fades away from her life, but is she going to have a new life somewhere with a clean slate? I don't know. Again, the morality does seem backwards on this one. I'm in line with you on that for sure. So
I guess we'll leave that one where it is. Good idea, just not sure on the execution. Okay, so let's go to our next story, which is called Hangnail on a Monkey's Paw.
Yeah.
Okay, and right, let me try and recall the setup to this one. Maybe some sort of, former Vice President Butler. Okay, so he's a former Vice President, and he's speaking out on, radicals and extremists and so on, that are destroying America. So again, very topical for the times and so on. But he's speaking on television, he's talking about all this stuff on TV, and when he gets home, there's a man waiting in his house who kind of kidnaps him, and it turns out that this guy was tortured as a result of, his policies or something like that. So he's back to exact revenge for the torture that he suffered. Now, the way he's doing this is he's using a monkey's paw. So he uses this paw to wish that this vice president will never die. He also uses it, I think, to stop people interfering in this kidnap attempt. It's your classic monkey's paw, like from that original story. You can wish on it and so on.
Well, it's a great title, Hangman on a Monkey's Paw. That kind of, there's some connotation there. You think, oh, okay, I understand this. This is part of cultural, lore, the Monkey's Paw. So you think, oh, they're going to do something unique with this, perhaps. And I guess they kind of do. And to your point, yet we see him use 2 wishes. The third wish, you think eventually they get stuck in a car on a railroad track together, and you think, oh, he's going to use the third wish to get out, but he's like, no, I used the first wish to escape. So that kind of explains, because you're the whole time like, where did this guy even come from? How did he even get in here? So he came across this and he used it to escape, and he wishes the guy never dies. And interesting, because if you think about it, people want immortality, right? But do they want immortality or they want eternal youth? I mean, there's a difference, invincibility, all that kind of thing. Immortality without eternal youth is a horrible thing, which we see in this episode. And I don't know why. Fast forward to the end, it's like years later. I don't know why the vice president still needs to be like taken care of. Like, can't they let, like, they're injecting him with stuff and all this, like, and it's the family, it's the guy who kidnapped him and put the curse on him's family that's taking care of him still. That confused me.
What I think it is, basically this vice president, the guy who kidnaps him is driving him away to whatever his fate is going to be, whatever he's got in store for him. I don't know what that is, because we don't find out, because the car gets hit by a train and the vice president gets mangled up in this car wreck, and he's basically like a half a torso with a head.
Oh, it's disgusting, yeah.
But because he's wished him to be immortal, it's almost like he says, well, he's my responsibility for now. And when they're injecting him with stuff, it's stuff to keep him asleep. Because his kid says, do you ever let him wake up? And he says, no, he would only suffer. I mean, it's kind of interesting. I guess it's some sort of... I mean, the closing narration is, for you to bear witness, a watcher who became a watcher of a different sort, a man who tried to give karma a push and lost his footing, who fell, along with the intended recipient of said karma, deep into the Twilight Zone. So I guess the kidnapper, maybe what it's trying to say is he should have let karma do its own thing, instead of trying to force the issue using the monkey's paw. And he ends up being a prisoner in a way, because he's got to now look after this head torso guy and inject him with sleep and stuff every day. And it's become his own curse.
A self-imposed curse, I guess.
Yeah, so, he's tried to give karma a push, and it's hit back, I guess. I don't know. What do you think of this one, man?
Well, it tries to be like a poetic justice thing, like, oh, you thought you were going to get revenge, well, the universe is going to get revenge on you, right? It's like, but again, he's choosing, from my interpretation, like, he's choosing to continue to ease this person's immortality, because he's never going to die, and he's telling his kid, like, you're going to have to take over one day, pay attention, these injections, you got to keep him asleep, but I guess I wished for one more kind of like reason why he would be locked into that. There's not really a Twilight Zone cosmic justice going on there. It's just, oh, I guess he felt guilty and he's decided to take care of this guy. Like, that's really the only explanation you get, and it's like, I guess, but again, the ramifications of immortality, when you don't, we just keep getting older, right? That shows you right there why we die. All right. I mean, like we're on this earth and our bodies degrade, and you don't want to live to 200 years old, because it's not a pretty sight. Even if this guy had his whole body, it wasn't just head and torso, as you said, it would be pretty gross. And yeah, it's a horrible existence that he's destined to do forever now. So it is unsettling for sure.
I'll put this one maybe sort of middling. It wasn't bad as such. It's just there's a few things that are a little problematic with it, but it's okay. It's okay. But our next story is called Cold Calculation. Now, this is very reminiscent of one particular Twilight Zone episode, I think. And can you think off the top of your head what this one is?
Well, the Forbidden... Well, yeah, the whole Forbidden Planet costumes and UFOs made me thinking about a lot of episodes, but I guess it would be Third from the Sun?
Correct. Absolutely.
Ooh, I passed the Twilight Zone test there. Thank goodness.
You can stay. But, I don't think we should spend too much on this one, because it is quite a simple story. It's flowered up with some conflict between characters and so on. But basically, we have a ship full of people going to try and find a planet to settle on. And they go to this planet, and they say, well, it's too cold for us. We need to heat it up. And in order to do so, they've got this device that will heat this planet up. So that's where the conflict comes from, because some characters are like, you can't do that. It's not fair. The beings on that planet will die if we heat it up. It's not right. We don't have the right to do that. And then there's other characters who are saying, I don't care. We need to live, so we're going to do it. And then they go, oh, hold on a minute. This planet is heating up by itself. The people on this planet are heating it up from what they're doing. It's Earth. So it is classic third from the sun kind of story. So what do you think of this one, Zach?
Well, just in the presentation alone, this is the first one so far that's been in black and white. So it really felt like the Twilight Zone more than any of the other stories. So I really appreciated that. Obviously, all the visual influences, like I said, like the UFO, the animated UFO prop from Forbidden Planet, the costumes that you see on Twilight Zone time after time are there. So it really felt like it sits on the shelf with all those other, astronaut Twilight Zone stories. And so I really, this probably might be my favorite one of the whole lot. Maybe it's the nostalgia that wins me over, but there was a twist. There was a story with those characters. A few guys on a bridge of a ship arguing about big moral issues. That's like the Twilight Zone right there, right? And a great ending. And I really enjoyed it. I mean, if this was like isolated, I'd be like, yes, check out this cool Twilight Zone story I found. You gotta get through a lot to get here. But now that we're here, this is my favorite one. I'm gonna go ahead and say it.
Yeah, I mean, it is. You're right. It is a bit of a throwback with a sort of modern concern at its center, global warming, and they come across, the people are doing it themselves, which is very Twilight Zone. The monsters are due on Maple Street. All you have to do is turn off the lights and they'll do it themselves. Right. So it is kind of humanity screw themselves over at every turn type of story. So yeah, it's decent. It's a good sort of throwback Twilight Zone story, I think, but I'm not sure there's much else to say on it because it is quite straightforward, isn't it?
Yeah. So at the end, though, like, I had one interpretation of it though. It's like, were they like? Is it one of these things where like the planet is at a different time, like speed than the aliens, and like they saw like early life, and then they see humans now, and then humans will burn themselves out, and they'll just go land on the planet, or is it really like, oh, humans are causing global warming right now, and we have, I mean, I'm trying to say about the time discrepancy, because originally they say, oh, it's just some, early lower life forms. I didn't know if like they got a better look at it, and that was the twist, or if it was truly, in real time. That was the only kind of point of question I had about it. Did that strike you at all?
There's definitely some disparity with how they see time, I think. And whether that's just because they live a lot longer than humans, so they're like, yeah, we'll wait 100 years, they'll be warm enough by then. Or whether 100 years to them takes, 10 seconds. I'm not quite sure which one it is. But there's definitely some sort of time disparity there, yeah.
And that was a clever wrinkle to kind of allow for the twist more than otherwise. So yeah, thumbs up.
Good. Okay, right. Our next story is called It's All in How You Frame It. Now, this seems to be about some millionaire guy or something, developer, and he develops these glasses.
You already seem to not be a fan of this one, Tom.
Well, I've got to tell you, this one was a struggle. This one was a struggle. He develops these glasses. I can't even remember what they're supposed to do, but he's able to see people's souls, I think. Correct. With these glasses. Yeah. So he can tell if someone's a good person or a bad person. He sees someone dying, he sees their soul leave their body, that kind of thing. Now, before we get to the end, and he's going along and he's seeing people in various situations. And I just kind of got confused about what really was going on half the time. I mean, is that just me?
Yeah, because I didn't know if it was like a mood soul, right? If there were like different colors for what was going on, because he sees different colored auras around people. I didn't know if that was just happened to be their aura, or if it was based off their intentions or their actions. That was a little unclear. So he makes some decisions based off some things he sees, and it's supposed to be some big twist. But I didn't really get why it was a twist, because I didn't understand what, like, oh, they're orange? Well, that must mean this, right? They never really clarify. And I guess he doesn't really know, because he's the only guy with these glasses. Kind of like They Live, right? Where he's got the glasses, and he sees a whole different kind of world. But In concept, I really did like this story, though. I just wish they would have defined. Yeah, I did. I like the idea of it. Because it's like, you know, if I can go ahead and jump to the end here. He sees everybody has a soul, but everybody tells him like he's like a heartless guy and this and that. And he looks in the mirror and he sees that he sees that he has no soul, and that's kind of like I know it's very, you know, maybe a little too ham-fisted, right, about the evil corporate guy, right? Yeah. But I thought, okay, that's interesting. But I wish they had defined some more things along the way. And surely he's not the only person who's a soulless corporate monster out there. Surely he'd run into one or two other people without an aura. I don't know, but he did. But then he saw someone die. And he saw their soul leave their body. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Again, there are a lot of kernels of interesting ideas in this story, but everything was left way too vague, as you said, Tom. I found myself like turning the pages back and forth a couple times to like, did I miss something? Because I felt like this was not defined. I feel like if there was like one little dialogue somewhere I might have skimmed over that would have explained why he took certain actions, but they weren't there because I checked. I checked again. And that's what hurts it, I think, a lack of defining exactly what is going on.
Yeah, I just struggled knowing, you know, what path was he taking, what benefit is he getting from this, and maybe it's in there, you know. I'll try and read it again, but overall I didn't think much of this one.
Well, but it takes technology, you know, and it makes like that be the magic object of the Twilight Zone, right? Like he has these magic glasses, you know, or, you know, for example, you know, but it's just he had created it through his, you know, it's like Chris Nolanizing the Twilight Zone. Okay, well, he has these magic glasses. Where do they come from? Oh, he invented them. This, that. So that's what we're doing here. I'm kind of modernizing it. So I appreciate what they were trying to do with this story, and I kind of maybe they had a page limit. You know, these are comics. You know, if this was a free form Netflix show or whatever, or CBS All Access show, there wouldn't be a time limit, and we could be shorter or longer, maybe expand on some things. So there you go. So I will defend this one. I know you seem kind of down on it, but I will defend the soul glasses story. So.
Okay. Well, I'll let you have that one. I don't know about this next one though.
Oh, this next one is terrible.
Oh, it's called Laughing Matter, and it's about like this bank manager guy, and his son works in the bank. His son is attracted to a female employee in the bank. He draws a picture of her one day, and his father finds it, and he kind of humiliates his son, doesn't he? And, you know, he shows everyone this picture, and he shows the woman this picture, and he's like, you know, he's attracted to you, etc., etc., trying to embarrass his son. But she actually thinks it's quite sweet. But then he sort of fakes like a check going missing or something so he can fire this woman. And then he goes, well, actually, I found the check. I didn't need to fire her at all, but she's going to stay fired.
And she's going to know that you didn't stand up for her, and she's going to hate you forever for that. It's like, man, like, do you really... Like, I understand father and son drama, but this is extreme. Yeah. This is extreme and unnecessary. So
yeah, and unrealistic to the, you know, nth degree.
Right.
Now, unfortunately, his son then commits suicide in the office. He hangs himself. And everyone walks in, and when they see him, they all start to laugh. Or it's actually when they see a picture that he's drawn of his father, I think. Yeah. Is that what it is?
Yeah, because everyone starts laughing because he wants people to laugh at his dad the way they laughed at him. I assume that was like his last bit of revenge, but he has some kind of magic in his artwork or something like that.
Because then when his dad walks in, whenever anyone sees his dad's face, then they start to laugh at his dad's face. Dad's then like, are you crazy? Have you all lost your minds? And he's running around. And we don't see Dad's face throughout the rest of the story because he's always got his arm in the front of his face or something. And he's running around, smashing things up. Oh no, you know, what's happened? And then he runs into the bathroom and he looks in the mirror and his face is now like the drawing that his son did of him. That people were originally laughing at.
Then he laughs at it and has a heart attack, I interpreted, and he dies.
Yeah.
And I, the beholder, this is not, that's for sure.
That's so true. And the closing narration is, oh, would some power the gift give us to see ourselves as others see us, said the poet, for one entirely humorless, entirely ridiculous man, a very special parting gift postmarked the Twilight Zone. I just thought this story was really, really awful.
I agree.
You know, I don't know what to say on it, to be honest. It's just...
a party gift from a young man who committed suicide because he was pushed to it by his father from the Twilight Zone. Like, whoa, wow, thanks, guys. That's dark and pointless and silly all at the same time. So
poorly executed.
Yeah, we're being tough on this. I mean, we love the Twilight Zone, okay? If you heard us, we sang the praises of the Straczynski run and the Shadow crossover, okay? And we've liked some of the stories here. I know it's kind of tough. It's a tough run here, guys, but we're just telling it how we see it. So there it is. If somebody can find some meaning and appreciation for this story, let us know. I'd be curious to hear it. So.
Absolutely, man. You know, I always say this on every show. If I don't like an episode and it happens, or I interpret it a particular way and someone thinks differently, then I'm always happy to hear that and I'll always read it out. So if someone likes this story or any of these stories that we've maybe give a bad time to, then do let us know. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now our next story, it's sort of set up like it kind of reminded me of Stand By Me, you know, the movie, the way it was drawn and stuff like that.
Yes.
And we got a couple of kids, and they're always being sort of pestered by this younger kid, it seems, or a kid who always wants to hang out with them. What they do, they're in a position of power, and they're kind of like, all right, well, I'll tell you what, to hang out with us, you need to go in and say to your mum, such and such a thing. You've got to go in and say whatever. So he goes into his house and he says what they tell him to say to his mother. But then when he goes in, you just hear the sound of his mother giving him a beating. So this happens once, and then they watch some Rance McGrew on the TV, which was a nice little touch.
Yeah. Because I was reading this around the time that episode had come out, so I was like, it was perfect. Of your episode of it, podcast, yeah.
So, that happens. And these kids are kind of mulling over why they're so mean to this other kid and so on. So that happens. And then they see him the next day, and he's playing with an Etch-a-Sketch. Is that what you called them in America, Etch-a-Sketch? That's
correct. We had Magnadoodles and Etch-a-Sketches. I was more of Team Magnadoodle because it was easier. But Etch-a-Sketch was a lot harder because all he has the knobs, so it's hard to draw on that thing,
He draws this picture on the Etch-a-Sketch, and he's like, here's a picture of me mum. And it's sort of like just a load of wavy lines, a weird sort of shape on the Etch-a-Sketch. Mm-hmm. And they're like, okay, well, you really can't draw then. And he's like, okay, whatever. And then he's like, so can I hang out with you now? And they're like, well, you can, but you've got to go in and say this to your mum. And he said, okay, then. So he goes in and says something presumably quite nasty to his mum, and he gets another beating. Second beating of the story. Then what happens is he goes in, again, can I play with you? Can I hang out with you? Well, you got to pass the last test. You got to go in and say this to your mum. So he goes in, says this thing to his mum, and gets another beating. And they're like, oh man, she's really giving it to him this time, And they actually go over to kind of see what's going on, and they see him reaching out, and then the door slams shut. So they go away, and then they kind of go back the next day or whatever. And they go in, and the house is empty, except for an Etch-a-Sketch. Now, earlier on, they said, well, he really can't draw because that drawing on the Etch-a-Sketch was so muddled, and it was just this crazy drawing. But they find the Etch-a-Sketch, and he's drawn a perfect picture of the two of them on it. So, and they say, he could draw his mother in it. So what it's saying is, that when he drew this sort of distorted image on the Etch-a-Sketch, then he could actually draw his mum.
Yeah. So his mom, is an energy being of some kind, and they're aliens. And this is now I'm hypothesizing, right? My interpretation, right? For some reason, the child could present himself as a human child, but the parents don't, or the mom doesn't, and she is a ball of energy, and he ticks her off one too many times, and it's probably like, all right, these kids are bad influence, we're leaving this planet, this is garbage. And then he leaves his parting gift to his friends, and that was my interpretation. And I don't know, there's something here, there's something to the story I kind of like, but again, there's also a lot of stuff missing, which I feel like would be necessary to really have this kind of bring it home. Because they try, again, like, as you build it up there, it's like, oh, he can't draw, but he can. Like, that's their big twist, right? I don't know. What are your thoughts, Tom?
I wasn't sure whether she was an energy being or some alien. I thought it was just making out that she was something monstrous, something. Maybe this is how he sees his mum. She's actually just horrible. This horrible, in his mind more than actually what she physically is. But then it kind of says in the closing narration, a motion before would-be presidents and vice presidents proceed with caution because the victims of your club's blunt force trauma may just be refugees desperate for a little companionship before they're dragged back to the nether regions of the Twilight Zone. So is that saying there's some beings, here?
They walk among us, Tom.
Yeah. Again, you can kind of read it. You can follow this one fairly easily. I was just a little confused by what exactly she was supposed to be in the end.
And I think if you're just confused by one thing at the end, and it's kind of open to interpretation, that's fine. I do wish there was maybe a little more, like, I don't know what, but there a little more something to kind of fill this story out. But like you said, you can read it from point A to point B. It's all very logical. I don't feel like there were any missing pages, like I had in some of the other stories. so that definitely has it going for it there.
Okay, so again, maybe it's something I'll go back to and maybe try and reappraise that one in the future. But certainly not the worst in the collection,
right.
But problematic in a couple of ways.
It'd be in my top tier of this one. If there's like 3 tiers of this collection, it would be in the bottom of the top, but in the top one nonetheless.
Okay, so our final story is called The Comics Code, and I won't spend a huge amount of time on this one because it's quite simple. We have this guy, and I forget, he's probably based on that real guy from back in the 50s or whatever, who was saying, comics are evil.
Yes, yeah, there was that book, Seduction of the Innocent. Was the real book that came out in the 50s. So it's like banned like EC Comics and all that good stuff of Tales of the Crypt that you guys talk about on the Patreon. But then that's when superheroes really lost their edge. That's when Batman lost his gun. Robin and all that's the family friendly stuff from the 50s and 60s. So I appreciate the historical inspirations for this. Absolutely.
He actually wins, and there's a big sort of turnaround. Comics are becoming demonized and so on. But then a guy turns up and he says, "You know what? We want to make comics, but we want to make them wholesome." They put this sort of, it's like the Comics Code Authority stamp on them, but they called it Fredrickson friendly. So if it's got this on it, then it's a decent comic. And this comic called Gentle Adventures, Purity Comics, Bland Man, Pastoral Fun, and all of these books seem to sell quite well. And he says, these have been so successful, we want to expand the brand, we want to bring out other products. And he's like, yeah, that sounds great, we're even going to open up a summer camp. So they take him there, and we discover that actually this guy who's came to them with this business idea is actually an alien, and these comics that they've been putting out with his stamp on are a way to speak to the other aliens to say, this is what our plans are, this is what we're going to do. And he pulls his face off and he says, comics are dangerous, and then they kill the guy.
You want to see something really scary?
Yeah, and I think it's short enough to be kind of just a little funny little stinger one, I think. It's not going to change anyone's life, but it was a bit of fun, I suppose.
Yeah, I did like, again, the whole historical precedent for it was interesting, taking a twist on actual real-life events. There were Congress people who wanted to, end comic books and all that. And I enjoyed the self-awareness of it all. It was like Bland Man and just the most rudimentary, silly stuff in the world. But that's the the equivalent of what they were pushing out back then in response to the criticism of comics. And yeah, a big alien reveal at the end of like, hey, we're going to take over the world now kind of thing. That's it's short. It doesn't seem pretentious at all, and it's a fun little story and a nice button to end on. I agree with you. So
So I guess, as a whole, because this is where Twilight Zone comics seem to have ended, this is the point where I will bring in the people who want to skip to the end and see whether it's worth buying. So if you had to sum this collection up, make an assessment, what are your overall thoughts on it, and is it worth investing in, do you think?
I think it's well-intentioned. I think they definitely, they took a lot of the right cues from the Twilight Zone, like story beats and setups and whatnot. They might not have been able to stick the landing on maybe about half of them, but hey, look at the Twilight Zone itself. It had its dud episodes as well. So I feel like the spirit of the Twilight Zone is here. You have to look a little deeper for it than you could in the previous stories, and I think that's what's hurting him, because the Straczynski run and the Shadow run were so good that our expectations were kind of set pretty high. Had this come out in a vacuum, you'd be like, oh, okay, that's recognizable as the Twilight Zone, that's fine. But it's got a hard bar to live up to based off those previous ones, and I think that and just the lack of focus is the main thing with this one. A lot of these stories, they have some good ideas, but they don't stick with those ideas. They try to throw too much in, and in some cases makes the story a little confusing to follow. But look, if you're a Twilight Zone fan and you want some more Twilight Zone stories, and I would recommend, as critical as if you have been listening the whole time, as critical as we have been to this, I would still recommend checking it out. If you're a diehard Twilight Zone fan, it's definitely worth a space on your shelf.
I'll maybe take it down a little notch from that. I'm certainly no Twilight Zone purist, and I'm not saying that there's only one way of doing things. And you're absolutely right. Straczynski set the bar high. Twilight Zone: The Shadow was great fun. I do feel this was a bit of a step down from both of those. And you're right, maybe it was trying to do too much within the time it had. So some of them were just confusing. I found a lot of them easier to follow on a second reading, but then you kind of know the sting by then. You've already found out the twist on the first reading, and I don't think there's enough depth there to really make them stories that you will read over and over. There's some of them that I think, maybe I'll go back to again. Is it worth investing in? I would say if your local library has comic books, graphic novels collections, then maybe check it out there first. Or you can find it on eBay for a couple of bucks. Then check it out. I'm not saying don't buy it. I just think if you enjoyed the Straczynski run, then maybe dial down your expectations a few notches. And sure, you might get a kick out of it, but it's certainly not. It's certainly not as good as I hoped it would be, which is a bit of a shame.
Too much shadow, not enough substance, right?
Hey, good one. Okay, so that is our look at Shadow and Substance. And I hate to kind of be negative on the Twilight Zone podcast. I know I review episodes badly sometimes, but you got to say how you see it, haven't you? You got to kind of review things how you find them. That is our look at the Twilight Zone comic books from Dynamite. I hope you've enjoyed it. I know it's something a bit different, but I think for me it's sometimes good to check out these different things, but also gives me time to prepare for our next episode. So Zach, it's a shame it's been a year since we last spoke, because I really enjoyed doing this with you, man. So hopefully it won't be too long in the future.
Absolutely, Tom. Yeah, I love to come back on and talk about some Twilight Zone of some form or fashion with you. Always great to do that. And we'll have to make it sooner than a year. And hopefully, not that I didn't necessarily like these comics, but something we can share a little more positivity with. So I look forward to it, the next opportunity we have to podcast together.
Yeah, absolutely, man. We'll do something soon. Maybe either here or on the Patreon, one way or another. We'll do something. But thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time to do it.
Absolutely. Like I said, man, you were one of the first podcasts to listen to, so it's an honor to be here on the Twilight Zone podcast and do great work, man. Look for every time I see a new Twilight Zone episode, Patreon or not, in my feed, I'm like, oh, all right. Set aside some time tonight, listen to this, turn the lights. I try to listen to it in the format that you recommend, the late night radio kind of stuff, that moody stuff. It's perfect for that kind of stuff. So great stuff, Tom. Keep up the good work and take as long as you want, man. I know that you're always like, well, I'm sorry, the episode's coming out. Hey, take as long as you want. The quality's great. Don't worry about pumping them out. And these little side quests, so to speak, like about the comic books here, or Rod Serling seminar here, like that's great, and that adds to the scope of what you're already doing on the podcast. Because remember, guys, there's only so many episodes, so we don't want time to run out because we want to keep this podcast going. So,
well, thank you, Zach. Thank you, man. Okay, well, what I will do, I will put links to Zach's podcasts in the show notes if you've enjoyed his contribution, and I really do recommend them. I haven't checked out Smallville, but I kind of only watched it like half of Smallville, but I was a huge Christopher Reeve fan back in the day, so,
He is in a couple of episodes, just so you know. Yes, yeah. So I'll let you know which ones. If you want to check it out, I'll let you know which ones.
Okay, I will do that. But links to Zach's shows are in the show notes, so check those out. And why don't we go over to Rod Serling to find out what's coming up next, and we'll see you next time.
And now, Mr. Serling.
Next week on the Twilight Zone, we roll in a musical instrument purchased in this store. Now there are pianos and pianos, but this one was manufactured in our own very strange, unpredictable factory. It comes to you via the typewriter of Mr. Earl Hamner, and it boasts a collection of oddities and oddball doings. Next week, you can roll up the rug as we bring you a piano in the house.